She was the most powerful woman in the world, ruler of a nation of 700 million. And within 11 years, she and both of her sons would all die violent, bloody deaths. She inherited a dynasty. She built an empire of power that bestrode the largest democracy on earth, and she poured all of it into two sons. One she groomed to inherit the throne, one she never wanted to touch it. Both would be destroyed. How does a single family, the most powerful in all of India, produce three of the most shocking deaths of the 20th century? One after another, after another. Her name was Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister, the Iron Lady of India. To a subcontinent, she was a near goddess of power. To her two sons, she was the gravity that pulled them both into early graves. One from the sky, one from an assassin's bomb, with her own murder waiting in between. Three things tonight, the official histories smooth over. One, the ruthless favourite son she anointed as her heir, the terror he unleashed on a nation, and the reckless stunt that killed him at 33. Two, the gentle older son who fled politics, flew planes for a living, and was dragged onto a throne he never wanted, straight toward a suicide bomber. Three, the curse that stalked this family across 3 generations, and whether the woman at its centre built it with her own hands. This is not a story about a prime minister. It is a story about a mother, 2 sons, and a hunger for power that buried all 3. It begins with a girl raised to rule a nation. To understand how a mother could lead both her sons into early graves, you have to understand that Indira Gandhi was not born into an ordinary family. She was born into a dynasty, and raised, from the cradle, to believe that power was her birthright and her burden. She was born in 1917, in Allahabad, the only child of Jawaharlal Nehru, a man who would become the first Prime Minister of independent India and one of the towering figures of the 20th century. Her grandfather was a wealthy and prominent leader of the Indian independence movement. The Nehru family was Indian political royalty before India was even a free country. And little Indira grew up in the very centre of the storm, in a household where Mahatma Gandhi himself was a frequent presence, where the leaders of the freedom struggle came and went, where her father was repeatedly thrown into British prisons for the cause, and where the fate of a nation was the daily business of the dinner table. It was a childhood of extraordinary privilege and extraordinary loneliness. Her father was often in jail or consumed by the independence movement. Her mother was frequently ill, dying of tuberculosis when Indira was still young. The girl grew up solitary, watchful and serious, shaped by a single overwhelming idea, that her family existed to lead India, and that she was the next link in that chain. She was sent to study in Europe, at Oxford, absorbing the wider world. But her true education was the one she had been receiving since birth, how power worked, how to hold it, and how much it could cost. She married a man named Heiress Gandhi, no relation to the Mahatma, a coincidence of names that would give the dynasty its world-famous surname. And she gave birth to 2 sons who would inherit everything she was, Rajiv, the elder, born in 1944, and Sanjay, the younger, born in 1946. 2 boys, born into the most powerful family in India, raised in the shadow of a coming throne. When India won its independence in 1947 and Nehru became Prime Minister, Indira moved into his official residence and became, in effect, his political partner, his hostess, his confidant, his right hand. She watched, up close, for 17 years, exactly how a nation was governed. There was no better apprenticeship in power anywhere on earth. Her father died in 1964, and the dynasty did not end. It paused, and then it found its true heir. After a brief interlude, in 1966, Indira Gandhi became Prime Minister of India. The men of her own party had backed her, many of them believing she would be a pliable figurehead, a quiet woman they could control, useful only for the magic of the Nehru name. They could not have been more catastrophically wrong. Indira Gandhi turned out to be one of the most formidable, ruthless, and cunning political operators the modern world has ever seen. She crushed her rivals. She split her own party and rebuilt it around herself. She nationalized the banks, championed the poor, and won a landslide that made her unassailable. And in 1971, she reached her zenith. She led India to a crushing military victory over Pakistan, a war that birthed the new nation of Bangladesh and established India as the dominant power of South Asia. In that moment, Indira Gandhi was worshipped. One of her own party leaders famously declared that India is Indira and Indira is India. She was no longer just a prime minister. She was the living embodiment of the nation itself. And as she rose to this dizzying summit of power, she turned to the question that consumes every dynasty. Who would come next? She had 2 sons, and she had already, quietly, chosen between them. For a brief, glittering moment in the early 1970s, Indira Gandhi stood at a height almost no political leader ever reaches, and her family stood there with her. She was the unchallenged master of the world's largest democracy. She had defeated Pakistan, dismembered an enemy state, and made India a nuclear threshold power. She was adored by hundreds of millions of the poor as their champion and protector. Her face was on every wall, her name on every tongue. And behind her stood 2 grown sons, the future of the dynasty, the heirs to the greatest political inheritance in the democratic world. It looked like the founding of something permanent. A Nehru had ruled, then a Gandhi, and 2 more Gandhis waited in the wings, ready to carry the bloodline forward into the next century. It had the shape of destiny, of an unbroken golden line stretching into the future. It was, in truth, the calm before a series of catastrophes that would tear this family apart, one body at a time. Here is the fateful choice Indira made, the one that set the whole tragedy in motion. Of her 2 sons, she chose the wrong one, or rather, she chose the dangerous one. Rajiv, the elder, was gentle, easygoing, and utterly uninterested in power. He became a commercial airline pilot, married an Italian woman named Sonia, and wanted nothing more than a quiet, private life away from the brutal arena of Indian politics. But Sanjay, the younger Sanjay, was different. Ambitious, aggressive, impatient, and ruthless, Sanjay hungered for power the way his mother once had. And Indira, looking at her 2 sons, was drawn to the one who burned. She chose Sanjay as her heir, her right hand, her successor in waiting. It was the choice of a mother who saw herself in her more ruthless child. And it would prove disastrous for the nation, and for Sanjay himself. Because the very ruthlessness that drew Indira to him was about to be unleashed on 700 million people, with consequences that would scar India for a generation, and put Sanjay on a path to an early and violent death. Remember the choice, 2 sons, and Indira anointed the ruthless one, Sanjay Gandhi, the favourite, the heir, the young man who burned with his mother's own hunger for power. And soon, Indira's grip on India would face its greatest crisis, and to save it, she would do something that shattered the world's largest democracy. She would suspend it entirely. And she would hand the dirtiest work of that dark chapter to the one person she trusted most, her son Sanjay. What he did with that power would horrify a nation. To understand the catastrophe that was coming, you have to understand Sanjay Gandhi, the favoured son, the chosen heir, and one of the most destructive figures in modern Indian history. Sanjay was, by every account, his mother's weakness. Where Indira was disciplined, calculating, and endlessly patient, Sanjay was impulsive, arrogant, and contemptuous of rules. He had no real qualifications for power. He had failed at his one notable business venture, an attempt to build an Indian people's car that produced almost nothing but losses and scandal. He held no elected office. He had no governmental experience of any kind. And yet, by the mid-1970s, Sanjay Gandhi had become one of the most powerful people in India, for one reason and one reason only: his mother could not say no to him. Indira's bond with Sanjay was the great blind spot of her otherwise ruthless and clear-eyed career. She indulged him completely. She trusted him absolutely. She allowed him to gather around himself a coterie of loyalists, to insert himself into the machinery of government, to wield enormous unofficial power without ever holding an official position. He became her gatekeeper, her enforcer, her shadow. Ministers and officials learned to fear the Prime Minister's son more than the Prime Minister herself, because Sanjay was unpredictable, vindictive, and answerable to no one but his mother, who would forgive him anything. It was a dangerous arrangement waiting for a dangerous moment. A young man with limitless power, no accountability, no experience, and no restraint, standing just behind the most powerful office in the largest democracy on earth. And in 1975, that democracy was about to be suspended, handing Sanjay the chance to do real and lasting damage to the lives of millions. In June of 1975, Indira Gandhi's world cracked open. A court found her guilty of electoral malpractice and ruled that she must give up her seat and be barred from office. Her opponents smelled blood and demanded she resign. The Iron Lady was, for the first time, genuinely cornered. She did not resign. Instead, she did something that stunned the world. She declared a state of emergency, suspending India's democracy entirely. Constitutional rights were frozen. The press was censored. Thousands upon thousands of her political opponents, rival leaders, activists, journalists, anyone who threatened her, were arrested and thrown into prison without trial. For 21 months, from 1975 to 1977, the world's largest democracy became, in effect, a dictatorship ruled by one woman. It was the darkest chapter in independent India's history, and Indira Gandhi authored it to save her own grip on power. And into the vacuum of that suspended democracy stepped Sanjay. With the court silenced, the press muzzled, and all opposition jailed, Sanjay Gandhi, a man with no office and no accountability, became one of the de facto rulers of India. The emergency removed every check that might have restrained him, and he seized the opening completely. He launched his own programs, pursued his own obsessions, and wielded the power of the state as a personal instrument. There was no one to stop him, no law to bind him, no press to expose him. His mother had created a moment of absolute unchecked power, and she had handed a piece of it to her reckless, ruthless son. What he did with it became a national nightmare. Sanjay Gandhi used the lawless years of the emergency to pursue two obsessions, and both inflicted enormous suffering on the poorest and most vulnerable people in India. The first was slum clearance, the beautification of cities. Sanjay decided that the slums of Delhi and other cities were eyesores to be eliminated, and during the emergency, bulldozers rolled into poor neighbourhoods and demolished them, driving hundreds of thousands of the poorest people out of their homes, often with little or no warning, no compensation, and nowhere to go. Entire communities were razed in the name of his vision of a cleaner city. The most infamous episode came at a place called Turkman Gate in Delhi, where the demolition of a poor Muslim neighbourhood led to protests, and police opened fire on the crowd, killing people who were resisting the destruction of their homes. It was state violence against the powerless, carried out at the whim of the Prime Minister's unelected son. But it was Sanjay's second obsession that became the defining horror of the emergency: forced sterilization. Sanjay had decided that India's population growth was a problem to be solved, and he launched a mass sterilization campaign of staggering scale and brutality. Across northern India particularly, officials were given sterilization quotas, and a coercive machinery descended on the poor. Men were rounded up, sometimes literally seized from buses, from markets, from their villages and sterilized, often against their will. Government employees were told they would lose their jobs, their salaries, their access to services, unless they were sterilized or produced others to be. Slum dwellers were told they would not get a home, a license, or a loan without a sterilization certificate. Millions of people, by some counts more than 6 million in a single year, were sterilized, many of them forcibly, in unsanitary conditions, and an unknown number died from botched operations and infections. It was one of the largest campaigns of state coercion against its own people in the democratic world's history, and it was driven, above all, by one man. Sanjay Gandhi, the favoured son, exercising a power he had been given by no one but his mother. The terror fell hardest on those least able to resist: the rural poor, the slum dwellers, the powerless, and it burned a hatred into the heart of the Indian public that would soon have its reckoning. In 1977, confident that her control was total, Indira Gandhi made a fateful miscalculation. She ended the emergency and called elections. She believed the people would reward her. Instead, they destroyed her. The Indian electorate, finally given a voice after 21 months of repression, took its revenge. Indira Gandhi was swept out of power in a humiliating defeat. And Sanjay, the architect of the sterilizations and the demolitions, the most hated man in India, was rejected too, losing his own bid for a seat. The dynasty that had seemed eternal was, suddenly, out of power and in disgrace, blamed for the darkest abuses the Republic had ever known. For the first time, the family faced investigations, inquiries, and the very real possibility of prosecution and ruin. Mother and son were political pariahs. But here is what made Indira Gandhi extraordinary. She was not finished. With Sanjay at her side, masterminding her comeback, she clawed her way back. She apologized, she regrouped, she exploited the chaos of her divided opponents, and within 3 short years she pulled off one of the great political resurrections in modern history. In January 1980, Indira Gandhi was returned to power, Prime Minister of India once again. And Sanjay, now elected to Parliament himself, was openly her heir apparent, the chosen successor, poised to inherit the most powerful office in the land. The dynasty had risen, fallen, and risen again. Sanjay stood at the threshold of everything his mother had built for him, and he had just months to live. In the summer of 1980, Sanjay Gandhi was at the peak of his power, the anointed heir, a member of Parliament, the second most important figure in India, his mother's chosen successor, with the whole future of the dynasty resting on his shoulders. And then, on a June morning, he climbed into the cockpit of a small private plane to do the thing he loved most: fly fast and dangerously, with no regard for the rules. He was an inexperienced pilot with a reputation for recklessness. And on that morning, over the heart of New Delhi, he was about to attempt a stunt that would kill him in seconds. The heir his mother had built her entire future around was about to fall out of the sky. On the morning of the 23rd of June 1980, Sanjay Gandhi took off from the Delhi Flying Club in a small acrobatic aircraft, and minutes later, he was dead. Sanjay was an aviation enthusiast, a man who loved the thrill of flying and who flew the way he did everything else, aggressively, impatiently, with contempt for caution and rules. That morning, he took the controls of a new aerobatic plane and, over a residential area near his own home in central Delhi, he began performing dangerous stunts, looping the aircraft through the sky. He attempted a loop, or a series of aerobatic maneuvers, at low altitude, and he lost control. The plane stalled, plunged, and crashed nose first into the ground. Sanjay Gandhi and the one other person aboard were killed instantly. He was 33 years old. The official investigation was clear. It was an accident, caused by Sanjay's own reckless flying, performing dangerous aerobatics at too low an altitude in a way that left no margin for error. He had pushed the aircraft beyond what he could handle, exactly as he had pushed everything in his life beyond every limit, and this time the consequence was instant and fatal. There have been whispers of conspiracy over the years, as there always are when the powerful die suddenly, but no credible evidence has ever supported them. The truth is simpler, and, in its way, more fitting. The recklessness that had defined Sanjay's exercise of power, the contempt for rules and limits that had let him brutalize millions during the emergency, was the same recklessness that killed him in the sky. He died as he had lived, ignoring every warning. For Indira Gandhi, it was the most devastating blow of her life. This was not just her political heir, this was her favorite son, her right hand, the child she could never refuse, the one she had built her entire future around. Witnesses described her grief as total and shattering. The Iron Lady, who had jailed her enemies and faced down armies and ruled 700 million people without flinching, was broken by the death of her boy. She reportedly rushed to the crash site, and her first concern, hauntingly, was for the watch and keys her son had been wearing. A mother, in the wreckage, looking for the small things that had belonged to her child. And in that shattering grief, Indira Gandhi turned to the one person left who could fill the void Sanjay had left behind. Her other son, the gentle one, the one who had never wanted any of this. Rajiv Gandhi was everything his brother Sanjay was not, and he had spent his entire life deliberately staying as far from politics as he possibly could. While Sanjay had clawed toward power, Rajiv had built a quiet, happy, private life. He was a professional airline pilot, flying domestic routes for Indian Airlines, content with the cockpit and his family. He had married Sonia, an Italian woman he had met while studying in England, and together they were raising 2 children in a calm, apolitical household. Rajiv had watched the brutal arena of Indian politics, had watched what it did to people, had watched his brother become one of the most hated men in the country. And he wanted no part of it. He was gentle, modest, and genuinely uninterested in the throne. Of the 2 brothers, he was the one who had escaped the family curse of ambition. And then Sanjay died, and the full weight of the dynasty came crashing down on the one son who had never wanted to carry it. The pressure on Rajiv was immense, and ultimately irresistible. His mother, grief-stricken and aging, needed an heir. The dynasty needed an heir, and there was no one else. The party, the family, the machinery of power, all turned to Rajiv as the only one left who could carry the bloodline forward. By many accounts, Rajiv resisted. Sonia, his wife, resisted fiercely. She reportedly fought against it with everything she had, terrified of what the brutal world of Indian politics would do to her gentle husband and her family. She had seen where it led, but the gravity of the dynasty was too strong. In 1981, less than a year after his brother's death, Rajiv Gandhi gave up his airline career, entered politics, and won Sanjay's old parliamentary seat. The reluctant son had been pulled onto the path he had spent his whole life avoiding. He could not have known that he was stepping onto the same road that had killed his brother and that would soon kill his mother and finally himself. While Rajiv was being drawn into politics, his mother was sowing the seeds of her own violent death in the troubled northern state of Punjab. In the early 1980s, a Sikh separatist movement, demanding an independent homeland, had grown increasingly militant. And armed militants had taken up fortified positions inside the holiest site in the Sikh religion, the Golden Temple in Amritsar. Indira Gandhi faced an agonizing choice, and characteristically, she chose force. In June 1984, she ordered the Indian Army to storm the Golden Temple, an operation codenamed Operation Blue Star. The army went in with tanks and heavy weapons, and in the fighting, the militants were killed, but so were many others, and the sacred temple complex was badly damaged. To Sikhs around the world, the assault on their holiest shrine was an unforgivable desecration, a wound to the very heart of their faith. The rage it ignited was deep, and it was personal. Indira Gandhi knew she had made herself a target. She had Sikh bodyguards in her personal security detail. And after Operation Blue Star, she was advised to remove them for her own safety. She refused. She did not want to be seen as distrusting Sikhs as a community. It was, perhaps, a principled decision. It was also a fatal one. On the morning of the 31st of October, 1984, as Indira Gandhi walked through the garden of her residence on her way to an interview, two of her own Sikh bodyguards turned their weapons on her. They opened fire at point-blank range, emptying their guns into her body. She was hit by dozens of bullets and died of her wounds, assassinated by the very men sworn to protect her in revenge for the assault on the Golden Temple. The Iron Lady of India, the most powerful woman in the world, was murdered in her own garden by her own guards. She was 66 years old. Her assassination unleashed a horror of its own. In the days that followed, anti-Sikh riots erupted across India, and thousands of innocent Sikhs were slaughtered in revenge killings. One more layer of bloodshed in a tragedy that kept multiplying. And, in the space of just over 4 years, this family had now buried a son and a mother, both dead before their time. There was one Gandhi left to inherit the throne. The reluctant one. The day his mother was assassinated, Rajiv Gandhi, the gentle former pilot who had never wanted power, became the Prime Minister of India. It happened with brutal speed. Within hours of Indira's murder, the party turned to her surviving son, and Rajiv was sworn in as Prime Minister. Swept into the highest office in the land on a tidal wave of grief and sympathy. In the elections that followed, riding the nation's mourning for his martyred mother, Rajiv won the largest electoral victory in Indian history. The reluctant son, the man who had been flying passenger jets just a few years earlier, now ruled 700 million people. The dynasty had survived, passing from mother to son across an assassin's bullets. And for a time, there was real hope in him. Rajiv was young, modern, and untainted by the brutality of the emergency. He spoke of dragging India into the modern age, of technology and computers and a new century. Many saw in him a clean break from the darkness of the past, a decent man who might lead the country somewhere better. He was, genuinely, different from his mother and his brother, less ruthless, more idealistic, more humane. But the throne he had inherited was a cursed one, and the world of Indian politics was as brutal as his wife had always feared. His term was battered by scandal, and by the same kind of fateful decision-making that had doomed his mother. Chief among them, he sent Indian troops into the neighbouring island nation of Sri Lanka, intervening in that country's vicious civil war between the government and a Tamil separatist group called the Tamil Tigers. The intervention went disastrously wrong. Indian soldiers were killed, and the Tamil Tigers, ruthless, fanatical, and pioneers of suicide bombing, came to see Rajiv Gandhi as a mortal enemy. He lost power in 1989, and as he campaigned to return, that enemy was preparing the bomb that would kill him. By 1991, Rajiv Gandhi was out of office, but fighting to come back, campaigning across India to reclaim the throne his family had held for 3 generations. The reluctant son had become a true believer in the dynasty's destiny. And the Tamil Tigers, nursing their hatred over his intervention in Sri Lanka, had marked him for death. They had perfected a weapon of unspeakable cruelty, a human being wearing a belt of explosives who would walk up to a target and detonate. On a May night in 1991, at a campaign rally in southern India, a young woman carrying flowers approached Rajiv Gandhi to greet him. And what happened next would complete the destruction of the most powerful family in India. On the night of the 21st of May, 1991, in the town of Sriperumbudur in southern India, Rajiv Gandhi was murdered in one of the most chilling assassinations of the 20th century. He was campaigning, working a crowd at a rally, surrounded by supporters and well-wishers in the warm darkness. A young woman approached him, smiling, carrying a garland of flowers, behaving exactly like the countless admirers who had come to greet him. She bent down before him, as if to touch his feet in a traditional gesture of respect, and then she detonated the explosives strapped to her body. The blast tore through the crowd, killing Rajiv Gandhi instantly along with many others around him. He was 46 years old. The assassin was a suicide bomber sent by the Tamil Tigers, in revenge for Rajiv's intervention in Sri Lanka's civil war years earlier. They had studied him, planned for months, and exploited the very openness and accessibility that made Rajiv a beloved campaigner. The decency that had drawn him to mingle with ordinary people was the opening that killed him. The gentle son, the reluctant pilot who had never wanted any of this, who had been dragged onto the throne by the death of his brother and the murder of his mother, was now dead himself, blown apart at a campaign rally, the 3rd member of his immediate family, to die a violent death in just 11 years. Think about the unbearable symmetry of it. Sanjay, the favoured heir, fell from the sky in 1980. Indira, the Iron Lady, was gunned down by her own guards in 1984. And now Rajiv, the one who had tried to escape it all, was destroyed by a bomb in 1991. A son, a mother, and a son. 3 of the most powerful people in India, all of them dead before their time. All of them violently, all of them within a single decade. The dynasty that had seemed destined to rule India forever had become a procession of coffins. And the woman at the centre of it all, Indira, had not lived to see the final act. But she had, in ways large and small, helped set every one of these deaths in motion. Stand back from the 3 deaths and look at the terrible pattern, because it reveals something deeper than mere bad luck. It reveals how the hunger for power consumed this family from the inside out. Trace each death back to its root, and the threads all run through the same hands. Sanjay died because of the recklessness and contempt for limits that his mother had nurtured, and indulged the same boundless arrogance she had let him exercise over a whole nation. Indira died because of Operation Blue Star, her own decision to storm the Golden Temple, and because of her own refusal to remove the Sikh guards, who killed her a chain of choices that were hers alone. And Rajiv died because of the Sri Lankan intervention, a disastrous policy of his own government, the consequence of being dragged onto a throne he was pulled toward by the deaths of the others. Each death grew out of the exercise of power. Each was, in part, a harvest of the family's own choices. This is what makes the Nehru-Gandhi tragedy so haunting. It was not a curse imposed from outside by some random fate. It was, to a chilling degree, self-generated, the predictable consequence of a family that had wrapped itself so completely around the pursuit and holding of power that the power itself became lethal. Indira chose the ruthless son and unleashed him on a nation, and his recklessness killed him. She chose force at the Golden Temple, and that force killed her. She pulled her gentle son onto the throne to preserve the dynasty, and the throne killed him too. The instrument of the family's greatness, their grip on absolute power, was also the instrument of their destruction. And there is a particular cruelty in Indira's role. She was a mother who loved her sons, genuinely and fiercely. Her grief at Sanjay's death was real and shattering. And yet her choices, again and again, placed her children directly in the path of destruction. She could not separate her love for her sons from her hunger to see them inherit her power, and in binding the two together, she bound her children to the same deadly fate that power had always promised this family. And here is the detail that makes this story almost unbearable, because the dynasty, even after 3 violent deaths, did not stop. The bloodline reached for power again, and the danger reached for it in return. After Rajiv's assassination, his widow Sonia, the Italian woman who had fought so desperately to keep her husband out of politics, who had seen her worst fears realized in the most horrific way imaginable, eventually did the very thing she had dreaded. Pulled by the same dynastic gravity that had claimed her husband, she entered politics herself, became the leader of the Congress Party, and rose to become one of the most powerful figures in India. The woman who had begged Rajiv to stay away from the throne ended up devoting her life to it after it had taken everything from her. And then their children, Rajiv and Sonia's son and daughter, Rahul and Priyanka, the grandchildren of Indira Gandhi, grew up and entered politics too, carrying the Nehru-Gandhi name into a 4th generation, becoming central figures in Indian public life. Children who had watched their father blown apart by a suicide bomber, who had grown up under the shadow of assassination, who knew better than anyone on earth what this family's pursuit of power could cost, and who reached for it anyway. They live, to this day, under permanent, heavy security, because the threat to the Nehru-Gandhi family has never truly ended. There is something almost mythic in this, a family that has buried its members to violence again and again, and yet cannot, will not, let go of the throne. Whether you see it as duty, as destiny, as obligation to a nation, or as the inability of a dynasty to escape its own gravity, the pattern is undeniable. The hunger for power that built this family, and that destroyed Sanjay and Indira and Rajiv, did not die with them. It passed to the next generation, and the one after that, an inheritance of both glory and danger that no death has been able to break. This brings us to the question at the very heart of the Nehru-Gandhi tragedy. The one promised at the beginning. Was this family cursed, or did they build their own destruction with their own hands? It is tempting to call it a curse. The sheer scale of the violence, a son, a mother, a son, all dead within 11 years, the dynasty stalked by death across generations, has the feel of something fated, something supernatural, a family marked by the gods for ruin. And in the popular imagination, that is exactly how it is often told. The cursed dynasty, the Indian Kennedys, a bloodline due, own to tragedy no matter what its members do. But look closely, and the curse dissolves into something more sobering and more human. There was no supernatural hand here. There was a family that placed itself at the absolute center of the most consequential, most violent struggles of a vast and turbulent nation, and that paid the price that such a position has always exacted. They made enemies, because power makes enemies. They made fateful choices: the emergency, the sterilizations, the Golden Temple, the Sri Lankan intervention. And those choices had violent consequences. They put themselves in the path of history again and again, and history is not gentle with those who try to ride it. The curse was simply the accumulated weight of the choices that come with the relentless pursuit and exercise of power. And yet, and this is what keeps the question open, there is also Indira's role as a mother, the way she bound her love for her children to her hunger for their inheritance of power. She did not have to anoint the reckless Sanjay. She did not have to pull the reluctant Rajiv from his cockpit and his quiet life onto the deadly throne. At every turn, she chose the dynasty over the safety of her sons, and her sons paid for it with their lives. So perhaps the truest answer is this: it was not a curse, and it was not simple fate. It was a family that loved power as much as it loved itself, and could never quite tell the difference until the bodies made the difference unmistakable. Indira Gandhi left behind two legacies, and India is still arguing over both of them more than 40 years after her death. The first is the legacy of the strong leader, the Iron Lady, who made India a power to be reckoned with. She won a war against Pakistan and birthed a new nation. She made India a nuclear-capable state. She championed the poor, nationalized the banks, and projected strength on the world stage as few Indian leaders ever have. To millions, she remains a towering figure of national pride, a woman who stood as tall as any man in a world that gave women no such room, who embodied India itself at the height of its confidence. There are Indians who revere her memory to this day. The second legacy is the darker one, the authoritarian who suspended democracy, the leader who jailed her opponents, censored the press, and unleashed her son to terrorize the poor during the emergency. To millions of others, Indira Gandhi is the woman who nearly killed Indian democracy to save herself, whose lust for power led her to the brink of dictatorship, and whose decisions at the Golden Temple and elsewhere left rivers of blood in their wake. She is a warning as much as a hero, a reminder of how easily even a democracy can slide toward one-person rule when a leader values power above all else. Both legacies are true, and they cannot be separated, because they flowed from the same source, the same iron will, the same hunger, the same refusal to ever let go. And that same indivisible quality, the thing that made her both great and terrible, is what destroyed her family. The strength was real, the darkness was real, and the price was paid in the lives of her sons, and ultimately her own. At the beginning of this story, 3 things were promised. The favourite son, his terror, and the stunt that killed him was Sanjay Gandhi, the ruthless heir Indira could never refuse, who used the lawless years of the emergency to bulldoze the homes of the poor and to drive a mass forced sterilization campaign that violated millions of the most powerless people in India. The very recklessness his mother indulged in him killed him. On the 23rd of June, 1980, performing dangerous aerobatic stunts over Delhi in a small plane, he lost control and crashed to his death at 33. He died exactly as he had wielded power, ignoring every limit. The gentle son dragged toward a bomb was Rajiv Gandhi, the airline pilot who wanted nothing to do with politics, pulled onto the throne by his brother's death and his mother's assassination. He became Prime Minister the day Indira was murdered, won the largest landslide in Indian history on a wave of grief, and then was himself blown apart by a Tamil Tiger suicide bomber at a campaign rally on the 21st of May, 1991, at 46 killed by the consequences of a war his own government had waged. And the curse that stalked the family was, in the end, no supernatural curse at all, but the accumulated price of a dynasty that placed itself at the violent center of power for generation after generation. Indira herself was assassinated by her own Sikh bodyguards on the 31st of October, 1984, in revenge for storming the Golden Temple. The middle body in a sequence of 3, each death growing out of the family's own fateful choices. A son from the sky, a mother in her garden, a son at a rally, 3 violent deaths in 11 years, and a bloodline that reached for the throne anyway. Hold this image in your mind. Picture a single family photograph from the early 1970s, at the height of their glory. Indira Gandhi, the most powerful woman in the world, stands at the center, radiant with command. On one side, Sanjay, young, intense, ambitious, the chosen heir burning with his mother's own fire. On the other, Rajiv, gentle, smiling, a pilot with a quiet life and an Italian wife, wanting nothing more than to be left alone with his family. 3 people at the absolute summit of a nation, with the whole future stretching golden before them. Now place that photograph beside what came next. Within 11 years, Sanjay would fall from the sky. Indira would be cut down by her own guards. Rajiv would be torn apart by a bomb. Of the 3 faces in that photograph of triumph, all 3 would die violent, bloody, untimely deaths. The Golden Family at the center of the world's largest democracy would become a sequence of state funerals, a nation weeping over coffin after coffin. That is the last image of the Nehru-Gandhi tragedy. Not the photograph of glory, but the unbearable knowledge of what waited just outside the frame. The sky, the garden, the rally, and the 3 graves of a family that had everything. And that power destroyed one member at a time. There is a question this story leaves us holding, and it reaches far beyond one family and one nation. It is the question buried in a mother who loved her sons and led them both to early graves. When does devotion to a dynasty stop being love and start being the thing that destroys the people you love most? Indira Gandhi did not want her children to die. She loved them fiercely, genuinely, a love that shattered her when Sanjay fell from the sky. But she could not separate that love from her hunger to see them inherit her power, and so she bound her sons to a throne that was soaked in danger. She anointed the reckless one and unleashed him, and it killed him. She pulled the gentle one out of his cockpit and onto the path that killed him too. At every fork, she chose the dynasty and told herself it was the same as choosing her children. It was not. The dynasty consumed them. That is the revelation at the heart of this story. The most dangerous inheritance a parent can give a child is not poverty or hardship. It is a throne. Because a throne demands to be held, and holding it has a price, and that price, again and again across history, is paid in the blood of the very children the throne was meant to glorify. Indira Gandhi gave her sons the greatest political inheritance in the democratic world, and it buried them both. She was India. India was her. And the family that ruled it learned, across 11 years and 3 violent deaths, that there is no power on earth great enough to protect the people you love from the cost of power itself. If this story stayed with you, it's because it strips away the comforting fantasy that power can keep your family safe when the truth is so often the exact opposite. The Nehru-Gandhis had everything. They ruled the largest democracy on earth for 3 generations. They had wealth, fame, adoration, and the most powerful office in the land, and it did not protect them. It doomed them. A son fell out of the sky doing the reckless stunts his unchecked power had taught him he could get away with. A mother was gunned down by her own bodyguards for a decision only absolute power would have let her make. A gentle son who tried to escape it all was dragged back and blown apart by the enemies that power inevitably creates. 3 deaths in 11 years, every one of them growing out of the family's own grip on the throne. And the most haunting part is that even after all of it, the bloodline reached for power again. And again, because some families cannot tell where their love ends and their hunger begins. So carry this out of it. When you envy the powerful, the dynasties, the ruling families, the names that seem to have everything, look closer at what that power actually costs the people inside it. The throne is never just a throne. It is a target painted on every person who sits near it. Indira Gandhi loved her sons and led them both to violent graves because she could never choose their safety over the dynasty's destiny. The grandest power in the world could not save the 2 boys she loved most. And if this haunted you, here's the next story you need to hear. Another powerful family, another parent who could not separate love from the hunger for legacy. Another child crushed beneath the weight of an inheritance they never asked for. The country changes. The tragedy rhymes. Watch that one next. Because once you start seeing what power does to the families who hold it, you will never again mistake a throne for a safe place to stand.